I really disagree with that characterisation, and given we've just had all these debates in Parliament about Opposition Day debates and what they do to MPs and intimidation, I actually think characterising like that is deeply unhelpful. No, we have a plan. I'll answer the question.
I resent your characterisation. I'm asking you a perfectly reasonable question. We pointed to the example of the interim Prime Minister of Pakistan, who has referred to the UK's Rwanda policy in defence of his country's decision to expel from Pakistan hundreds of thousands of Afghans who fled from the Taliban regime. Are you proud that he used your Rwanda policy to justify doing that?
Have you now got an airline that will be able to send people to Rwanda, or are you going to use the RAF?
To operationalise the bill.
So you're not able to say if there's an airline or not?
So I wouldn't expect me to get into commercial conversations.
Dame Diana Johnson for the Home Affairs Select Committee.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. On your pledge to stop the boats, you told me last time that considerable progress had been made. So I'm sure you'll be disappointed by the figures for the first 3 months of this year. There's a 10% increase compared to 22 and 23. But what I want to ask you about is the Safety of Rwanda Bill, which obviously I think we're all clear is going to get royal assent fairly soon, and you can then start to put people onto planes and send them to Rwanda. So have you now got an airline that will be able to send people to Rwanda, or are you going to use the RAF?
The Home Office are making all the appropriate arrangements. There's a range of options that they're considering. I wouldn't expect me to get into the detail of those because they may well involve, as you would expect, commercial
well, we know
conversations.
It's costing £11,000 per
but what I can say is the
so
preparations are all being made and have been made for a while to operationalise the bill.
So you're not able to say if there's an airline or not?
So I wouldn't expect me to get into commercial conversations. But all the preparatory work to operationalise the bill has been in place for a while.
Okay, so over 33,000 people have arrived in the UK irregularly since the Illegal Migration Act came into force last July. So are you expecting to send all 33,000 people to Rwanda? Because obviously they can't make a claim for asylum in this country.
Yes, well, as you know, the bill has to get royal assent, and then subsequent to that, the bill has to be put in force, so there'll be choices about which cohorts to initially apply the policy to. There's a range of different options for that. That's all in the planning work that's being done. So
there's 33,000 in limbo. So I just want to be clear: are you expecting that group will go to Rwanda?
I said we've been. My general view, I probably wouldn't characterise it as being in limbo, is anyone who arrives here illegally should not be able to stay. That is the government's and my very clear position, and we will do everything that we can to remove them, either to their home country, if it's safe to do so, or a safe alternative like Rwanda. But so there's no limbo about it. Our intention is that everybody who arrives here illegally should be removed.
Well, they are in limbo at the moment because they can't claim asylum, and you're not able to tell me how many of the 33,000 you think will go to Rwanda. So my understanding of 33...
Well, just because the IMA needs to be commenced for it to be enforced, but they are still they still come under the rules of the NABA, which also made the point.
No, these come under the rule of the Illegal Migration Act from the enactment in July. So these are 33,000 people who are in limbo. They can't claim asylum. They are waiting, I assume, to be sent to Rwanda. But I want to move on because I've got a couple of other questions. Could you just explain why number 10 blocked the reappointment of the independent Inspector of Borders and Immigration?
I don't believe that is the case. I think the Home Secretary addressed this in the House, and or either he or one of his ministers addressed this in detail in the House, and the decision was made by the Home Office.
So number 10 wasn't involved. Okay. I mean, it seems to some people that David Neil was actually a whistleblower, wasn't he? That he took the action he did because 15 of his reports were in the Home Office, never seeing the light of day.
No, and I think the response to all those, I think he welcomed actually when he gave evidence, maybe to your committee, I think he welcomed the response to those reports having been published, and I think the remaining two are imminently to be published.
They are, yes.
For what time it is. So they're imminently to be published, and I said obviously the Home Secretary and his ministers have addressed this in detail in the House previously.
Two other things I just wanted to ask you very quickly. Do you agree that there is a moral case to support Lord Brown's amendment to the Safety of Rwanda Bill to ensure that Afghans who helped our armed forces in Afghanistan are not sent to Rwanda? Yes or no?
we have an existing scheme
it's
to
not
bring.
working though, is it? That's the problem.
Well, yes, it's brought thousands of people to the UK and under 3 different streams. And obviously, in the interest of time, we don't need to go over them all here, but there's 2 different schemes, there's multiple different strands, and we have brought thousands of people safely from Afghanistan to the UK to provide them with sanctuary. And that contributes to our overall numbers of around 500,000 people that we've welcomed to the UK through safe and legal routes over the past few years.
The highest group within the small boats at the moment are from Afghanistan, aren't they, at 20%? So there is an issue about why those schemes are not working. My very final question...
Well, I just think on that doesn't mean the schemes are not working. It might just mean that there are many more people who would like to come to this country than we have the resources and the capacity to safely look after. And I think you can see that.
Prime Minister, I don't think that's the view of most people looking at those schemes and how slow they've been. But
but I don't think you can infer from that just because people are coming, the scheme isn't working. There's a limit to how many people we can take in this country, where we can house them and appropriately fund them. We've heard lots earlier from Clive about the pressures on local government. Ultimately, much of the pressure from housing people falls on local government, and that's why we do have to be cognizant of the numbers.
My question was quite specific about the moral case for supporting those who'd helped British forces in Afghanistan. Talking of moral cases, my very final question, I just wanted to ask you, you've already accepted the moral case for compensation to be paid to the infected blood victims. But I just want to ask you this. Did your whips tell MPs last December that implementing Sir Brian Langstaff's infected blood compensation recommendations would actually mean no tax cuts would be in the budget? Is that what your MPs were told?
I'm not. That's not something I'm aware of, but more generally, I'm acutely aware of the strength of feeling on this issue and the suffering of all of those impacted by what is an appalling scandal. I've consistently acknowledged that justice should be delivered, and we're working very hard to put things right, and that's why the acceptance of moral case for compensation was made in October of 2022, and infected individuals and bereaved partners registered with the scheme received interim payments at that time.
Thank you, Dame Diana. Joanna Cherry for the Human Rights Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. If we can continue with questions about your Rwanda policy. The Joint Committee on Human Rights concluded that the Rwanda Bill does not comply with the UK's human rights obligations and that it would place the UK in breach of international law. And we observed that other nations might be influenced by the way in which the UK treats its international obligations. And we pointed to the example of the interim Prime Minister of Pakistan, who has referred to the UK's Rwanda policy in defence of his country's decision to expel from Pakistan hundreds of thousands of Afghans who fled from the Taliban regime. Are you proud that he used your Rwanda policy to justify doing that?
I'm obviously not responsible for the comments of a person in another country, so I think that's a slightly bizarre thing to say. But what I can say is I'm very confident that our Rwanda scheme is in compliance with all our international obligations, and we've worked very hard to ensure that that's the case. And in fact, the principle of sending people to Rwanda as a safe country was a principle that was supported by the High Court and not challenged by the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court, and in accordance with the Refugee Convention. So I said I'm very clear on what we're doing and why what we're doing is right.
Dame Diana mentioned that there's evidence that quite a high number of people fleeing the Taliban regime are reaching the United Kingdom's shore on small boats. Are you proud that your members of Parliament were whipped against voting for an amendment that would have prevented Afghans who had aided or supported His Majesty's Armed Forces in Afghanistan from being sent to Rwanda? Is that something that makes you proud?
I really disagree with that characterisation, and given we've just had all these debates in Parliament about Opposition Day debates and what they do to MPs and intimidation, I actually think characterising like that is deeply unhelpful. No, we have a plan. I'll answer the question.
I resent your characterisation. I'm asking you a perfectly reasonable question. There are people coming to our shores
your framing
who have
of the
previously aided and abetted
you've asked the question, and I would appreciate the opportunity to answer it.
And you whipped your MPs against an amendment which would have prevented them from being deported to Rwanda. I'm asking you whether you're proud of that policy. That's all I'm asking.
Now hear
you.
from the Prime Minister. You've interrupted him twice.
We have a very clear obligation to make sure that we support those who aided us in Afghanistan, and we are delivering on that. We have multiple different schemes, which I've discussed in this committee in the past, 3 strands of them. Those schemes are operating and bringing thousands of Afghans safely to the UK in a way which is sustainable and where we can provide them with the appropriate support they need when they are here. And that is part of a broader approach that has welcomed 500,000 refugees to this country from varying different countries over the past several years. So we have a proud and compassionate record of making sure we support people who need that help, but it needs to be done in a legal way, and it needs to be done in a way that is sustainable for local communities and for the individuals concerned, so that we can provide them with the support that we need. And that's why we believe that our schemes, whether that's ARAP or ARCS, are the right way to do that. Other people will have their views, but we believe our way is the right way, and that's because we do believe we have an obligation and we're delivering on it.
The Home Office have prepared a 137-page long country information note on human rights in Rwanda, and it was recently updated in January, and it collates sources ranging from the US State Department to Human Rights Watch, which set out very grave shortcomings in the protection of human rights in Rwanda. Can you explain to me why it is that you feel able to ignore reliable information collated by your own Home Office in insisting that Rwanda is a safe country?
Because we have a new agreement with Rwanda that gives us the assurance that we need, that people's rights will be respected, and we're also supporting them to improve the processing of people's claims. I would also make the point, as I reiterated earlier, the High Court did find that it was generally safe for individuals to be relocated under the MEDP in Rwanda, and that wasn't challenged by the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. And the treaty that we now have makes further clear that all the obligations will be met of all individuals and without discrimination. I'd also say the Constitution of Rwanda includes a broad prohibition of discrimination. It does not criminalise or discriminate against aspects that have been raised, and Rwanda itself is passing new laws on asylum processing. So for all those reasons, we are confident that this policy is the right one and is deliverable within all our obligations, and I've had commitments from the President down that they are absolutely determined to make this work.
On that point, I think where you and I could agree is that the United Kingdom has some of the best human rights and equality protections in the world for people who are same-sex attracted or people who are transgender. But it's a matter of fact that there are no such laws in Rwanda, and indeed the Foreign Office travel advice for Rwanda warns, and I quote, that individuals can experience discrimination and abuse, including from local authorities. There are no specific anti-discrimination laws that protect LGBT individuals. Why then do you think it would be safe to send LGBT asylum seekers to Rwanda?
I can just refer to my previous answer. The Constitution of Rwanda includes a broad prohibition of discrimination, and it doesn't criminalise or discriminate against sexual orientation in law or indeed in policy. We do have a legally binding treaty which makes clear that obligations will be met in terms of treating people without discrimination as well. But finally, the bill means that UK decision makers will always be able to consider compelling evidence relating specifically to an individual's particular circumstances, whilst respecting the fact that our courts themselves have agreed with the government's view that Rwanda is generally safe for individuals relocated.
Just very briefly on that, if Rwanda is as safe as you say, and if you have no concerns about human rights protections in Rwanda, notwithstanding the Home Office's concerns, in what way do you expect the scheme to be a deterrent?
Because people will not be able to reside and remain in the UK. And what we've seen from the situation with our Albanian deal is that once we have a functioning returns agreement, that means that we can return people who come here illegally back to a different country, you see the arrivals drop, as they have done by over 90% from Albania. And if you look at how other countries, for example Australia, have dealt with this, it has also been found to work. That's why I'm confident that deterrence works, and without question, this is a novel thing to do, but we do need to look at novel and bold solutions to a situation which otherwise will just continue to get worse. I don't think that's right, I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's compassionate, because as we just saw weeks ago, people are tragically dying when they're exploited by gangs making these crossings. So for all sorts of reasons, the right thing to do is to break that cycle. Having an effective deterrent is critical to that. Indeed, the National Crime Agency has also agreed that having a deterrent is key.
Thank you, Joanna Cherry.